Hey guys, Rob Janicki, author of the forthcoming book Slacker 1991 Teen Spirit Angst and the Generation It Created. Uh, Technically, this is my third video on this YouTube channel. Second, that is music and book related. So, as I promised, I wanted to start sharing more info about the book and about 90s grunge and alternative music overall. So, yesterday, I wrote an article for GenerationRiff.com about how and why Nirvana and grunge took over when they did. In my opinion, and this is, I lived through it and through a lot of research as well, the culture at the time was really ready. A lot of things factor, and this is all in the article, but this is, the video is going to go into a little bit more detail. A lot of things factor into what happens when culture shifts. When there's a major change in culture, it's usually music. There's global and national events, there's politics, there's economies. All of this comes into play. And back in 91 is when commercially the grunge movement kind of started. But it really dates back to 1984 or even a little bit before that in Seattle. And if you really want to be true, you can go all the way back to the 60s with garage rock for that raw kind of distorted sound that wasn't really happening in music back until then. But that's too much to deal with. We can make a lot of videos and write a lot of articles on that. As far as this goes, and I'm just kind of hitting my computer here to bring some of the info up that I wrote yesterday. The article that I wrote is called "It Was Time for Anger: Why Grunge Music Exploded in the 90s." And everyone is going to have a different opinion, probably, but the opinions should kind of wrap themselves around the same thing. Because if you were there and if you remember what the music was like in 89, 90, even 91, and I talked about it in the article. Like, for example, if you look at the September Billboard Top 40 list in 1990, it reads as follows: MC Hammer, Wilson Phillips, John Bon Jovi, Mariah Carey, Belle Biv DeVoe, Prince, Poison, Anita Baker, Keith Sweat, and Michael Bolton. Music is subjective, right? I know it is. The only person on that list that I care anything about is Prince. He is one of the greatest musicians of all time, in my opinion, and one of my favorite artists of all time. Everything else on that list, while popular, commercially successful, good pop music, R&B, rap, I mean, it is what it is. It's music to play in the background or have some fun to while you're riding in the car or whatever at a party. But in my opinion, that kind of music was always a bit soulless. It didn't do anything for people. Not lyrically, anyway. And that's what really set the grunge and alternative movement apart from all the other types of music out, beyond this in the early 90s. So that was 1990. Now, we get to 91, the week that Nevermind was released, okay? So the week of September 1st, 1991. Metallica, Natalie Cole, Rush, Bonnie Raitt, Color Me Bad, Boys to Men, Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, Van Halen, Michael Bolton, CNC Music Factory. Nirvana, that was the top 10 of Billboard's list. Nevermind landed at 144. Makes sense. Nobody really knew who they were outside of Seattle. The record label was really trying to give this record a push. They thought that it was going to do, 100,000 copies, maybe, something like that, maybe more. So 144, I guess, was pretty good at the time for when Nevermind first showed up on the charts. But going back to the bands that were top 10, right? Okay, Metallica was already popular. This was the Black Album, their self-titled album that most people refer to as the Black Album. That record changed Metallica's career, both from their initial fan base, which was all about thrash metal to a more commercial heavy metal sound that a lot of their early fans were not a fan of and left them. But because the Black Album was so commercially appealing, instead of 7.5 minute songs, they had 3.5 minute songs, 4.5 minute songs with 1 or 2 hooks instead of 6 or 7 hooks. They got radio play, they got MTV play, and they blew up and went into the stratosphere of mainstream music, even though they're a heavy metal band. So they're kind of their own thing. But listen to some of these names again. Natalie Cole, Bonnie Raitt, Color Me Bad, Boyz II Men, Bob Seger from a bygone era, Van Halen also from a bygone era, although this new iteration with Sammy Hagar and not David Lee Roth, but still a band from the 70s. And CNC Music Factory, Michael Bolton, whatever. So again, nothing that dramatic, nothing that intense lyrically or emotionally, right? But lurking in the background was Nevermind. Fast forward all the way to the following year, and it's not really that long if you think about it. It was January 11th, 1992, when Nevermind finally reached #1 on the charts. Came out in September of 91, became #1 January of 92, displacing Michael Jackson and his album Dangerous from the #1 spot. Now, most people know who Michael Jackson was. He's been gone a while, and if you're not of a certain age, you wouldn't have remembered him performing or his music being on the radio 15 times a day, or his videos being on MTV 15, 20 times a day. Michael Jackson was the biggest star in the entertainment world throughout the 80s. You can throw in a few people here or there, but Michael Jackson was probably the world's biggest star for quite some time. To knock him off the top spot, the Billboard album chart, with a band like Nirvana, again, living through it, it was like, what the hell is happening? How is this even possible? But it was possible. And Nirvana didn't do it by themselves. They weren't the first band to play that kind of music. Nirvana is a sum of its influential parts, right? They were fans of punk, of metal, the Beatles, Pixies, so alternative music. And they brought all of that together to create a sound that was new and it was fresh, especially at that time. Something about Kurt's voice, something about his angst, something about the way he would string words together. Some songs did have lyrical meanings and definitions behind them. Some, admittedly by Kurt, were just words that sounded cool together in his mind and, made them fit into a song and into his vocal melody. But there was this visceral thing that was happening with the band and the youth culture at the time. People were angry. Kids were angry. I was angry. All of this is in the book, by the way. Slacker, 1991, Teen Spirit Angst and the Generation It Created, coming out later this year inspired by you books. There's a link in the comments for you to reserve your signed copy. I'm also going to have some dates later on this summer, dates that we'll talk about, pre-sale events and release date events for the book, as well as appearances that I'm going to make discussing the book and then eventually book signings once it's out. Anyway, all of this stuff is in the book and then some. It was an amazing time for music, an amazing time for culture, and because it got so big at that point, things like, I shouldn't say because of. In addition to Nirvana blowing up, you had things like Lollapalooza happen. Eventually, a few years later, you had Warped Tour happening. And then the other bands we all know, like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Stone Temple Pilots, Smashing Pumpkins, so on and so on, Green Day. All of this stuff became commercially gigantic, but it became acceptable. So radio changed. When Nirvana exploded, it changed top 40 radio because, and you'll see it in the book, as the Billboard charts changed, or as music changed, the Billboard charts changed. and you had alternative bands, and you had grunge bands, and you had heavy rock bands again topping the charts. And MTV changed. No longer did you see Michael Jackson 20 times. No longer did you see Paula Abdul or CNC Music Factory or whatever writing out the playlist every single day. Alternative and grunge music used to be buried on 120 Minutes and Alternative Nation. Two great shows MTV used to have back in the day that would play those up-and-coming bands, that underground music. But soon that underground music became above ground, and it became the commercial music, the most successful commercial music of the beginning of that decade and through the middle of the decade, actually. So that's kind of the story behind the article. So they'll also put a link in the comments for the article on Generation Riff. And this channel is new. I've never written a book before, so this book is brand new in more ways than it being a new book and me being a new author. So I'd really love your comments, thoughts, opinions, your knowledge, anything you want to share about this music and that time, especially at the beginning of it. You know, when did you sense it was changing? Did you sense it was changing? Were you surprised like some people were surprised? Were you clued into the underground? Like, luckily I was. I had some friends who knew about this music before before the 90s and the mid and late 80s. So I had a little bit of a sneak peek into it. But I'd love to know other people's experiences with this music and what you remember about culture changing because of it. Once again, thank you for checking this out. Please subscribe to the channel, like the channel, make some comments, share it with your friends who like this kind of music, and I'll be able to give you a lot more content along the way. All right, take care, everyone.